III Dracula was born in 1431 in the Transylvanian city of Sighisoara, in a modest home that today serves as a restaurant, which would honestly be a little surreal to eat a meal at the birthplace of a sadistic warlord and legendary Dracula. Though born aristocratic, it was complicated since his father was an illegitimate son of Prince Mircea the Old, who ironically lived only to be 32 years. Still, he was raised as second-in-line heir to Wallachia, as his father and grandfather had been before him. While these areas had been independent principalities at the time, just so you get a sense of location, they have both since been absorbed into Romania. At the time of his birth, Wallachia was subject to the Ottomans' rule, a large military might that, of the time, Vlad Dracula would resist this subjugation in his quest for power. As son of Vlad II Dracula, now please excuse the quality of this one, but this was the best period piece I could find of his dad. So his father chose the surname Dracula, meaning dragon, after joining a religious and military society to which he belonged, Order Draconum, Order of the Dragon. While this order was based on military conquest through chivalry, it appears that his father joined the order mainly with the hope that the Catholic Church would help him gain power. When he sired Vlad III, Vlad was naturally given the name of Dracula, meaning son of the dragon. So this part of the book is also true. There was a man named Dracula. He may have even been born in Transylvania. The myth of Dracula's castle, you say? Such a castle did and still does exist. You can actually tour it in Romania. It's called the Bran Castle and is set high upon a hill with beautiful vistas, allowing for views of the land that allowed it to be a strategic location for military pursuits, of which Vlad Dracula would have many. But it's unlikely that he ever stepped foot inside the castle, as it was mainly a military base. Now, as I mentioned, the real Vlad Dracula was just as bloodthirsty as the fabled Count Dracula. Personally, I think much more so. But what he used to pierce the skin was not his teeth. He used long, sharpened sticks, tens of thousands of long poles to impale his victims. Most were sharpened, but some were blunted depending on the type of impalement he chose. The lucky ones received the sharpened poles. They did their work in seconds or minutes, while the blunted ones could have easily taken hours or even days to slowly work their way through the victim's body, using the victim's own body weight to push it deeper in. While he did cause bloodshed through a variety of means that we'll get into later, his method of choice was impalement, earning him the nickname, depending on where you lived, of Vlad Japesh, Vlad Teeps, both meaning Vlad the Impaler. Later in his life, when imprisoned, his guards would say that he spent his free time peeling wood from the flooring, and he would use it to impale mice and spiders, and would just sit silently, watching them twitching as they died. And although impalement was his choice method, it was definitely not his only method. He was nothing if not creative. He had a great tendency to combine execution and torture with a litany of methods that were both prolonged and painful. Now, while it's true that he lived in a time of war when various forms of punishment and public executions were commonplace, even then, impalement was considered so brutal that it was saved for only the worst of offenses. Under Dracula rule, it became commonplace. As a young aristocrat in the time of war, he began military training at the age of 6. Beginning at 11 years old, he was captured by Sultan Murad II and imprisoned by the Ottomans for 5 to 6 years, with the Sultan transferring power to his 12-year-old son during this time. This child sultan kept young Dracula imprisoned in order to ensure that Dracula's father would remain loyal to the Ottoman Empire. Now, this was only Dracula's first imprisonment. Before his death, he would be imprisoned for nearly half of his life. He was first taken to the Tokat Castle, just inside the fortress of Egragaz, a huge fortress on a hill with breathtaking views. That also made it easy to protect. While landslides have left much of it in ruins, they also exposed an intricate secret tunnel system. The tunnels contained dungeons where prisoners, including Vlad Dracula, were kept, and longer tunnels allowed safe passage to other parts of the kingdom. Here, military and other aristocratic training of young Dracula continued, so long as his father behaved. Though his father did the bidding of the Ottoman during this time, we still must acknowledge that Dracula spent his formative years from around 11 to 16 or 17 imprisoned. It should also be said that though it was officially reported that both brothers were treated well as per the agreement, it was also said that Vlad Dracula's rebelliousness led to his receival of inhumane torture alongside his military training, which just seems like an odd and risky combination. While in captivity, young Dracula witnessed the Ottomans experimenting with impalement with great success at deterring future law-breaking. He was duly impressed. The Ottomans followed the tradition of the time of using impalement only for the most severe of crimes and used more for theatrics as a way of sending a warning to others to obey. Dracula watched and learned, and when it came his time to rule, he would use this knowledge to great effect as well as in increasing numbers, using it not only to highlight the worst of crimes, but more as a trademark of his reign. In 1447, at the age of 16 or 17, Dracula's father and eldest brother were killed by the Ottoman, his father buried alive under the order of the King of Hungary, giving new governance to Wallachia to Dracula's cousin, Vladislav II. Despite the fact that with Dracula's father and older brother gone, he was now first in line to rule. This, for Dracula, was unforgivable, and he never lost sight of avenging his father and brother. So, around the same time, Vlad Dracula had gained his first army and began his conquest. He gained and was knocked out of power on several occasions, and records indicate that he ruled on 3 particular occasions for a total of only 7 years. But that's all he needed to earn his place in history as the most feared of rulers. Shortly after gaining power in Wallachia, and in vengeance for the death of his father and brother, he planned an Easter celebration in his palace of Targovista. He invited the boyars responsible for the death of his family, and about 200 others and their wives for good measure. The boyars suspected nothing. The festivities were lively and the food delicious, yet upon ending of the meal, the older guests were taken beyond the city walls and impaled and left on display as a warning to the remaining aristocracy. The young and healthy, however, they were forced to walk over the course of 2 days, 50 miles, to where they became slaves in the renovating of Dracula's dream home, Panary Castle. While much of it is in ruin today, in its time it was the epitome of luxury, and its mountain perch made it an ideal location and was considered an impenetrable fortress. Once construction was complete, all of the enslaved workers, of course, were killed. In the meantime, he had replaced these boyars with men of his own choosing, specifically those he believed would be loyal to him, often those who were poor and of low social standing, who would be so thankful for the appointments that they'd be more likely to be loyal and obedient subjects. This is right from the playbook of tyrants and dictators. To them, loyalty is everything. During his bloody reign, he defied authority by refusing payment of an annual tribute that the Ottomans demanded. Now, I should mention here that if his subjects were even a small amount short on taxes to Dracula, they were severely punished, often executed for the crime of poverty. On at least one occasion, when a family was unable to pay their taxes, one member of the family was boiled alive, and the remaining family forced to eat her. He said as a way to help them save money for taxes. With this in mind, he still denied Sultan Mehmed II his due. So the Sultan gathered his army, and they headed in search of Vlad Dracula to rectify this problem and force payment through subjugation of Wallachia. Now, Vlad did make it difficult for him, invading his camp, setting fire to the tents. But this did not stop the Sultan. When he arrived, he found the gates unguarded and flung wide open. So, of course, he entered. And as he did so, the stench was overwhelming. And what he saw left him awestruck, a plethora of impaled men, women, and children, which later became known as the Forest of Corpses. Historian estimates say that it was composed of over 20,000 corpses in various states of decomposition. It was just horrific. There is some debate as to who the impaled people actually were, whether Ottoman or Dracula's own subjects, but seems most likely that it was a mixture of the two, with both Wallachian and Turkish noblemen, including some of high stature, alongside Wallachian women and children, propped up on vertical sticks planted in the ground. Some say that the Sultan decided that a man great enough to do this must be respected and even admired. Other accounts say that the smell of death made him nauseous and fear made him turn around. Whatever the truth may have been, the display was successful. Sultan Mehmed turned his army around and left, and Dracula, at the age of 31, became the most feared ruler of the land. The thought of him impaling his own subjects might seem improbable until we remember that he had his twisted ethical code. For example, he at one time invited thousands of peasants, poor and elderly, the sick and the weak, to his kingdom for a feast, where he invited them into a hall that he had constructed especially for the occasion. Once the meal was complete, he locked the doors and set the hall on fire. Nobody survived. From our perspective, it might seem like he was preying on the vulnerable, the weak. But Vlad Dracula and his twisted sense of morality stated that they were beggars, unable to provide for themselves, making them thieves of society, and thieves were deserving of death. Like all of us, Dracula was a multifaceted individual. He insisted that laws, including laws of morality, be strictly adhered to. The death penalty was the most common punishment, and since he acted as both judge and jury, few accused were ever found innocent or left alive. Aside from impalement, he engaged in a wide variety of methods of death, including peeling the skin off of prisoners' feet, rubbing them with salt, and letting goats lick it off. Of course, beheadings, which were common at the time, but also boilings, amputation, breaking of bones. Women had especially harsh rules and consequences. Any women accused of infidelity or unchaste widows would be put to death, with genital mutilation often playing a role. Women who had miscarried or had stillbirths were often accused of killing their own babies and put to death, accused of witchcraft. A fair trial did not exist. Another example is the story of a traveler who Dracula met on the road. Dracula graciously offered to give him shelter in his own castle, but in the morning, the merchant reported that 160 ducats had been stolen in the night. Now, Dracula promised that the money would be returned and the thief caught and punished. He told the merchant he would give him back the stolen money out of his own coffers, but secretly added a single extra ducat worth about $150 in today's money. The thief was caught, and as they prepared him for impalement, the merchant went to Vlad to let him know that an extra ducat was found. Vlad told the merchant that if he had not confessed to the extra ducat, he was going to impale the merchant along with the thief. It's really fortunate for the merchant that he took the time to count the money. Yet another example. Turkish messengers had came by to pay their respects to Dracula, but refused to take off their turbans, as was their religious custom. Dracula claimed to help strengthen their faith by nailing their turbans to their heads with 3 spikes each. For all his ruthlessness, He was well supported among the peasants of Wallachia, at least those who spoke out. However, it should be mentioned that he also had the habit of wearing a disguise and wandering about town to see if the peasants were truly following his commands and to make sure that they spoke well of him. And if he didn't like what he saw, executions were ordered. So it's likely that a considerable amount of his detractors were simply eliminated, while another good chunk of them decided to fall silent in an act of self-preservation. Still, for all of his shortcomings, to put it mildly, the fact that some admired him is indisputable. He is still revered by many in Romania today, as the many statues and pieces of art can attest to. It's easy to forget that during his life he was viewed to be a very religious man, surrounding himself with monks and scholars. He even founded 5 monasteries, such as Comana Monastery, that to this day proudly displays stained glass paintings of Vlad Dracula and his murdered brother, Mircea. It's also said that while he lived, the land was peaceful, as criminals were quickly eliminated. That is where the focus is, not on the many who may have been put to wrongful death or the meagerness of wrongs that were still severely punished. Of course, the reverse was also true, as even while he was still alive, there were rumors that he participated in the crucifixion of Christ and deaths of other martyrs throughout history. As the case may be, his mortality was finally proven in his last battle against the Ottomans in 1476. He had begun training to fight them since the age of 6, and had learned his skills of impalement when imprisoned by them as a teenager, then finally died at their hands at the age of 45. At the request of the Sultan, he was beheaded, his head slathered in honey to preserve it until it reached his palace, to be displayed on a stake outside the palace to prove to the Sultan's enemies and subjects that Vlad the Impaler was finally dead. This was quite the accomplishment. And while this is well documented, where his remains are today is still a bit of a mystery, though we may be getting closer to solving that. Many say that monks found his decapitated body and brought him to the island of Snegov, a tranquil island monastery in Romania. It was a monastery that he did donate to and also used to kill enemies, where he'd have them kneel before a Virgin Mary. Then a trap door would be released, impaling them on stakes below. Later historians found skeletons beneath the floorboards and upon the stakes of the monastery, laying truth to this claim. His tomb has been placed near the altar there so that the priest can forgive him every time he passes by, because if anybody needs forgiveness, surely it's him. However, excavation of this tomb in 1933 found only bones of horses beneath the so-called Tomb of Dracula. Some say his enemies still guard his body, or that they scattered his bones along the Carpathian Mountains to ensure that he could not rise from the dead. More recently, it came to be thought that he was buried in Italy in Santa Maria la Nova. Historians actually do believe that this is the most likely place, as the tomb has a dragon in the center for Dracula, surrounded by sphinxes that symbolize teeps, meaning impaler, quite likely a direct translation of Dracula the Impaler. Now, when Bram Stoker wrote his book, the mystery around the location of his body could have fed into the fictionalized aspect of portraying him as a vampire. As I mentioned before, even while alive, his mortality had been questioned, with rumors that he had been participating in impalements and other brutal executions for centuries. There were also some who thought that when his father was buried alive, he rose and became one of the undead, as it was rumored by some that he was helping his son Dracula in his conquests, and even imparted on his son the powers of immortality. And in some ways, he has gained immortality, as the legend of Dracula only grows with the passage of time. So what do you think? Was Dracula a fearsome tyrant, plagued by sadistic urges, or do you think he deserves reverence with his brutality forgiven, because much of what he did he claimed to be in furtherance of religious ideals. And the fact that he truly did rid his kingdom of all sorts of evildoers. After removing the myth, what do we think about the mere mortal man, Vlad Dracula? Sorry, I couldn't help it.